The clock ticked louder than it should have. Maybe it was the silence in the room. Maybe it was the nervous energy of 30 restless teenagers waiting for the bell. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered overhead, casting pale light across faces that looked more tired than alive. The teacher stood at the chalkboard, back to the students, chalk clutched like a dagger. He scribbled furiously, symbols sprawling across the black surface. When he stepped aside, the equation seemed to hang there like a monster. Tangled variables, roots, integrals, exponents stacked like towers ready to collapse. The students groaned. A ripple of defeat swept through the room. "This," the teacher announced, tapping the board with sharp, deliberate smacks of chalk, "is calculus. Not the fake kind you see in textbooks with multiple choice answers. This is real. The kind of problem you'll face in college if some of you even make it that far." The students shifted uncomfortably. Some laughed. Some rolled their eyes. But no one dared volunteer an answer. And that's when the teacher's eyes drifted not to the class, but to the back of the room. Standing by the wall, broom in hand, was Mr. Carter, the janitor. He wasn't young. His back was slightly bent from years of labor. His uniform, a faded navy blue, carried stains from floors, walls, and time itself. His hands, scarred and rough, gripped the wooden broom handle like it was the only thing keeping him steady. The teacher smirked. His voice sharpened. "You know what? Let's make this interesting." He turned, chalk still in hand, and jabbed it toward Carter. "Hey, Carter," he said, his tone laced with ridicule. "Why don't you take a crack at it? Or are you too busy cleaning up gum under desks to know what a derivative even is?" The room erupted in laughter, some of it nervous, some of it cruel. One boy slapped his desk, wheezing from the joke. Another girl covered her mouth, not wanting to laugh, but unable to resist the pressure of the crowd. And through it all, Carter stood motionless. His eyes didn't flicker with shame or anger. He just breathed, deep, slow, as if this wasn't the first time he'd heard such words, as if his skin had grown used to the sting. The teacher leaned against the desk, arms crossed, soaking in the attention. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue? Oh, wait, maybe you're just not equipped for this kind of problem." Again, the class laughed. It was supposed to be funny. It was supposed to remind them of their place and his authority. But what happened next was not in the script. Carter, slow and deliberate, placed the broom against the wall. The wooden handle tapped gently as it rested there, like a drumbeat before a storm. Then he walked forward, one step, then another. Every student's eyes followed him, whispers trailing behind like shadows. He stopped at the front of the class. The chalkboard towered before him. The teacher, still smirking, offered the chalk-like bait. "Careful," he said mockingly. "Chalk's for writing, not cleaning." The students howled with laughter again. But Carter took the chalk anyway. He stood there in silence, holding it between his fingers. For a long moment, he didn't move. His gaze rested on the equation, as though he was staring at something far beyond symbols and numbers, as though it pulled him back to a different time, a different life. The classroom grew silent. The laughter faded into uneasy stillness, because suddenly, it felt like the joke wasn't funny anymore. The chalk in Mr. Carter's hand looked small, fragile, like it might snap if he pressed too hard. He held it gently, between fingers worn from years of labor. Fingers that had gripped mop handles, scrub brushes, and trash bags. Fingers that no one in that classroom believed could solve anything more complicated than a clogged sink. The teacher leaned back against his desk, arms folded across his chest. His smirk widened, dripping with superiority. "Well, go on, Carter. Show us what you've got." Or, he tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "Should I call maintenance in case you break the chalk?" Laughter erupted, louder this time. It rolled across the classroom like a wave of cruelty. A boy in the back whispered, "Yo, no way the janitor knows calculus." Another girl muttered under her breath, "This is embarrassing." But most of them laughed with the teacher, because laughter is easier than standing against the current. Carter didn't flinch. He didn't look at them. He just kept his eyes on the board. The teacher took a step closer, lowering his voice so that only the front row could hear, though the venom carried. "You know what your problem is, Carter? You think just because you're older you know more. But knowledge isn't in a mop bucket. It's here." He He tapped his temple with a single finger. "And some of us are born with it." The implication was sharp. The laughter came again, but softer, now uneasy. Some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Carter finally turned, not toward the teacher, toward the class. His eyes swept over the students' faces, young and restless, some cruel, some uncertain. His gaze wasn't filled with anger. It wasn't even filled with hurt. It was steady, quiet, a gaze that carried weight, as though he had lived lifetimes they could never imagine. And without a word, he turned back to the equation. The teacher chuckled, trying to keep the room under his control. "Careful, Carter. Don't hurt yourself. Those squiggly lines aren't mop strokes." This time, the laughter was thin, hollow, because the students saw something in Carter's stillness, something in the way his shoulders squared, calm and unshaken, as though he wasn't the one being mocked, someone else was. The silence stretched, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is waiting. Then, slowly, Carter lifted the chalk to the board. His hand hovered just above the symbols, not yet touching, and the room held its breath. The chalk hovered above the board, frozen in his hand. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the classroom clock, which had been ticking loudly just minutes before, seemed to fade into silence. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, but their hum was drowned out by the pounding of young hearts caught between ridicule and curiosity. Carter's face was unreadable. His eyes traced the problem, line by line, as though he were reading not an equation but a memory. The teacher broke the stillness with a scoff. "What's the matter, Carter? Forgot how to count? It's okay. I'll let the kids teach you multiplication if you need." A couple of students chuckled, but it didn't carry. Their laughter felt forced, thin and awkward against the crushing silence, because something was shifting. The students noticed it in the way Carter stood. He didn't look lost. He didn't look nervous. He looked steady, centered, like a man who knew exactly where he was and exactly what he was about to do. He finally pressed the chalk to the board. The sound of it scratching against slate was sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. One stroke, then another. He moved quickly, decisively. Symbols fell into place. Roots simplified. Fractions reduced. His hand flowed across the board, not with hesitation, but with precision. Every motion was deliberate. Every line carried purpose. The students leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide. They didn't understand everything he was writing, but they understood enough to know it wasn't random. This wasn't a man guessing. This wasn't luck. This was knowledge raw. Unshaken knowledge pouring out of him like water from a spring that had been buried for too long. The teacher's smirk faltered. His eyes darted to the board, then back to Carter, then to the students whose silence was no longer empty but alive, charged with awe. Carter's hand didn't stop. Each stroke of chalk was faster, smoother, building momentum, as though he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. The equation, once a beast of tangled symbols, was unraveling. The chaos was being tamed, piece by piece, step by step. And in that silence, in that storm of chalk and revelation, the students realized something the teacher didn't want them to see. They weren't watching a janitor. They were watching a mathematician. And the storm was only just beginning. The chalk scraped faster now. Lines flowed into curves, numbers bent into symbols, and impossible tangles smoothed into clarity. Step by step, the monstrous equation on the board unraveled, like a knot being pulled apart by hands that knew exactly where the strands began. The students leaned forward, eyes locked, breaths held. Every strike of chalk was a revelation. One boy in the back whispered, "Wait, he's actually doing it." Another girl muttered, That looks right." But no one dared to laugh now, because what had begun as mockery was transforming into something they had never seen before. Carter didn't pause, didn't stumble. His movements were fluid, practiced like an artist painting from memory. And in that moment, the classroom no longer felt like a prison of fluorescent lights and old desks. It felt like a lecture hall, and Carter stood at the front as though he belonged there. The teacher's smirk had evaporated. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing at the board, as though trying to find a flaw, a misstep, a crack in the performance. But there was none. Finally, Carter slowed. His hand steadied, his strokes precise. He wrote the last line, the final symbol, and then, with a deliberate calmness, he underlined the answer. The chalk tapped the board once soft, but final. Then he set it gently on the ledge, as though laying a sword to rest after battle. The equation was solved. Perfectly, elegantly. The classroom froze. No sound, no whispers, no laughter, only silence. Then came the gasps, one by one, like sparks in dry grass. Shock spread across the room. A girl in the front covered her mouth. A boy whispered, "That's the right answer. I saw it in the textbook last week." Another student shook his head in disbelief. They weren't looking at Carter the same way anymore. The teacher's face flushed red. He let out a strained laugh, the kind of laugh that doesn't come from humor but desperation. "Lucky guess," he said, his voice cracking slightly. But the words fell flat. Even he didn't believe them. Carter turned, his eyes calm, steady. His voice, deep and resonant, broke the silence like a bell. "There's no such thing as luck in mathematics." The words hit harder than chalk against slate, because everyone knew it was true. In that moment, the power in the room shifted. The teacher no longer stood as the unquestioned authority. And Carter the janitor, the man with a broom, had revealed a glimpse of the truth. He was more than they ever imagined. The storm had broken, and its aftermath would change everything. By the time the bell rang, the classroom was no longer a classroom. It was a stage that had just witnessed something no one could explain. The students spilled into the hallways, buzzing like bees shaken from their hive. Their voices filled the air, weaving through lockers and stairwells, carried from one group to the next. "Did you see that?" one boy said, eyes wide. "He solved it in like 5 minutes," another whispered. "No way, he's just a janitor," a girl muttered, glancing over her shoulder as though the truth itself might be listening. Rumors spread faster than the truth ever could. Some said Carter had been a college professor. Others claimed he was once a scientist who lost everything. And a few whispered stories darker still that he'd been silenced, stripped of his career because he had dared to stand against people in power. By lunch, Carter's name wasn't spoken with mockery anymore. It was spoken with curiosity, with awe. Some students gathered around tables, sketching fragments of the problem on napkins, retracing the steps they barely understood, just to confirm what their eyes had already told them. And the more they replayed it, the more one truth became impossible to ignore. Mr. Carter knew things their own teacher struggled with. But if that was true, then why was he here? Why was a man with knowledge like that pushing brooms instead of teaching behind a desk? In the corner of the cafeteria, 2 boys sat whispering. "My brother goes to the university downtown," one said. "He heard about Carter years ago, said he was brilliant, said he wrote papers professors still talk about." "Then what's he doing here?" the other asked. The first boy lowered his voice. "They say he was blacklisted for exposing something he wasn't supposed to, for standing up against the wrong man." The second boy's eyes flickered toward the math teacher, who now sat alone at the far end of the room, hunched over his lunch tray, his fork stabbing at food he wasn't eating. The whispers grew louder with each passing day, in hallways, in classrooms, even in hushed conversations among faculty. And though Carter said nothing, though he continued sweeping, mopping, quietly doing his job, his silence only deepened the mystery. Because silence, when wrapped around truth, becomes heavier than words. And the weight of Carter's past was beginning to settle over the entire school. The students didn't see him as just the janitor anymore. They saw him as a man carrying a story the teacher wished would never surface. But secrets, once stirred, have a way of clawing their way to the light. And Carter's secret was no exception. That night, the math teacher sat at his desk long after the last custodian had left the building. The halls were dark. The only light came from the lamp on his desk, casting long shadows that crawled across the walls like accusing fingers. He tried to grade papers, but the numbers blurred on the page. His hand shook, his pen scratching in angry half marks before he slammed it down. All he could see etched into the back of his mind was Carter standing at the chalkboard, the equation falling apart in his hands like it was nothing. All he could hear was Carter's voice, There's no such thing as luck in mathematics. The words echoed, louder now, like a threat. The teacher stood pacing, running both hands through his thinning hair. He had worked too hard to get here. Too many years spent clawing for respect. Too many battles fought in silence. Too many shortcuts taken. And Carter, of all people, Carter was a reminder of the one thing he had buried: the past. He pulled open a drawer and yanked out a folder, flipping through papers, research notes, old documents. His eyes darted nervously across the lines, hunting for reassurance but finding only memories. Because Carter wasn't just a janitor. Carter wasn't just a man with chalk-stained fingers and quiet dignity. Carter was the man who once stood beside him in the same academic halls, under the same roof of prestige and ambition. Carter was the one who had written the research, the one who had carried the ideas, the one who had discovered what the world applauded the teacher for. And when Carter tried to expose the truth, when he dared to accuse, the university had turned its back on him. Because it was easier to believe the word of a young white professor with promise than a black scholar who challenged the system. Carter had been silenced, blacklisted, stripped of his career, left to sweep floors while the teacher built his name on stolen glory. And now he was back. Not in a lecture hall, not at a university podium, but back where it mattered most, in front of witnesses, young, impressionable minds who now looked at Carter as if he were something more than a man with a mop. The teacher pressed his hands to his face, breathing hard. If the truth came out, if even a whisper of it reached the wrong ears, his career would collapse. Not just his career, his reputation, his legacy. Everything he had stolen would be stripped away, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. He whispered into the empty office, his voice trembling. "I can't let him ruin me, not again." The silence answered back, heavy and suffocating. In that silence, fear took root. It wrapped itself around the teacher's chest, tight and unrelenting. And beneath that fear was anger, an anger that burned with the desperation of a man cornered by his own lies. Because deep down, he knew the truth. Carter wasn't trying to ruin him. Carter didn't even need to try. The truth itself would do that on its own. And that truth was getting closer to the surface with every whisper in the hallway. The next morning, the classroom felt different. Not louder, not rowdier, different. When Carter entered with his mop and bucket, the students didn't look past him the way they used to. They looked at him. Their eyes followed him with curiosity. Respect something new. He moved with the same steady rhythm, wringing out his mop, pushing it across the tiled floor in long, practiced strokes. But the whispers followed him, not mocking whispers this time. Questions, curiosity, admiration. By lunch, a small group of students gathered around him near the supply closet. One boy held out a folded sheet of paper. "Mr. Carter, can you show me how you did that step yesterday? The one with the derivative?" Carter paused. His hands were still damp from the mop water, but he took the paper gently, scanning the problem. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Of course," he said softly. He knelt beside the boy, using the back of the paper as a board, his thick, work-worn fingers moving with surprising grace as he rewrote the problem. His voice was low, patient, steady. "You don't start here," he explained, pointing to the fraction. "You start here where it looks messy, because if you can simplify what looks messy, the rest takes care of itself." The boy's eyes lit up with understanding. "Oh, I get it now." Soon, more students joined. A girl pulled a textbook from her backpack. Another scribbled equations on a napkin from the cafeteria. A circle formed around him, students leaning in, listening, asking, learning. Carter didn't lecture. He didn't command the room the way the teacher did. He guided. He listened. He taught not just math, but patience, discipline, resilience. "Don't be afraid of the hard problems," he told them. "The hardest problems are the ones that teach you the most. They demand more from you, and that's where you grow." The students nodded, some taking notes as though every word mattered. From across the cafeteria, the teacher watched. His fork clinked against his tray, untouched food congealing in front of him. His eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched, because in that moment, he saw what the students saw. Carter wasn't just answering questions. He was inspiring them. In less than a day, Carter had done what the teacher had failed to do all year. He had captured their respect not through authority, not through fear, but through truth. And the teacher felt it slipping, his grip on the students, his image as the expert, his authority. Every laugh they shared with Carter was a knife in his pride. Every notebook filled with Carter's words was a threat to his power. Carter had stepped into a role the teacher could never take from him, the role he was born for. Not janitor, mentor, teacher. And the more Carter gave, the more the students looked at the man at the front of the classroom and wondered, why is the one pushing the broom more of a teacher than the one holding the chalk? The question spread like a quiet fire, and the teacher could feel the flames licking at his feet. The confrontation happened on a Thursday afternoon. The hallways were nearly empty, echoes of lockers slamming and sneakers squeaking fading into silence as the last students left the building. Carter had just finished mopping the second-floor corridor when the math teacher appeared in the doorway of his classroom. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, but his eyes were sharp, restless, almost feverish. "Carter," he said flatly. His voice didn't carry mockery this time. It carried something heavier command. Carter looked up, wrung the mop slowly, and set it in the bucket. "Yes? Come with me," the teacher said. No explanation, no request, just an order. And without protest, Carter followed him into the classroom. The door shut behind them with a hollow click. The teacher leaned against his desk, folding his arms. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He just stared at Carter with a thin, tight-lipped smile. Finally, he said, "I don't know what you think you're doing, but it ends now." Carter tilted his head slightly. "What is it you think I'm doing?" "Don't play dumb," the teacher snapped. His composure cracked, the words spilling out faster. "You've been answering their questions, sitting with them, acting like some second professor." His voice dropped into a growl. "You're a janitor. That's all you'll ever be here. You sweep floors, you empty trash cans, you don't teach my students, you don't step into my classroom, and if I ever see you holding a piece of chalk again, I'll make sure you're fired so fast you'll be lucky to find work scrubbing toilets." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind of silence that begged to be broken by fear. But Carter didn't flinch. He simply placed his hands behind his back, standing with the quiet dignity of a man who had faced worse storms than this one. "Is that so?" he said softly. The teacher sneered. "Yes, that's so. Don't think I don't know what you're doing. You're trying to embarrass me, trying to make me look weak in front of them. Well, it won't work. This is my classroom, my school. You don't belong here." Carter's eyes flickered toward the chalkboard, the same board where he had solved the impossible equation. Then he looked back at the teacher, his voice steady. "I don't need to embarrass you," he said quietly. "You've already done that yourself." The teacher stiffened. His smirk faltered. "What did you just say?" Carter stepped closer, not menacing, but calm, composed, his presence filling the space more than the teacher expected. "You still haven't told them, have you?" Carter said. His voice was almost a whisper, but it carried like thunder in the empty classroom. "You haven't told them why I had to leave the university." The teacher's face drained of color. His jaw clenched, but no words came out. Carter's eyes held his for a moment longer. Then he turned away, picking up his mop bucket. "I'm not here to take your job," Carter said softly as he headed for the door. "But the truth doesn't stay buried forever." The mop bucket squeaked against the floor as he pushed it into the hallway, leaving the teacher alone in his silence, shaking, suffocating under the weight of words he couldn't escape. And for the first time, the teacher realized Carter wasn't just a threat to his authority. He was a threat to his entire life. It started small, just a few curious students in the library, flipping through dusty archives and old university records on borrowed laptops. But small sparks, when fanned, can grow into fire. The whispers about Carter had spread so far that curiosity turned into obsession. How could a janitor solve a calculus problem that left even their teacher fumbling? Who was this man, really? One girl, Emily, had a brother in college. She sent him a message late at night. "Do you know a professor named Carter? Used to teach math? Black guy, older, quiet?" The reply came back almost instantly. Her brother's words made her sit up straight. "You mean Dr. William Carter? The Carter? He was a genius. wrote papers on theoretical models professors still reference. But he disappeared years ago. Nobody talks about him anymore. Emily's heart raced. She screenshot the reply and shared it with her friends. Soon, a group of students huddled together, searching Carter's name online. What they found was scattered, broken pieces of a puzzle deliberately buried. Old journal entries with his name at the top. Conference photos where he stood on stage, speaking with authority. And then, nothing. His name vanished after a certain year, as if someone had erased him from the story. But one boy, Marcus, went further. His cousin worked in the university's administration office. And late one night, through whispered calls and risky questions, Marcus learned what no one else dared say out loud. The truth. Years ago, Dr. William Carter had uncovered something at the university. A case of academic theft, data manipulated, research stolen, and at the center of it was another professor. The very same man now teaching them. Their teacher. Carter had confronted him, had demanded justice. But the university, fearful of scandal and unwilling to believe a black professor over a young white academic with promise, chose to silence Carter instead. They branded him difficult. They questioned his integrity. They blacklisted him quietly, doors closing one by one until no institution would hire him. The research, the breakthroughs were published under another man's name, their teacher's name. And with Carter out of the way, he had risen through the ranks, building a career on foundations that weren't his. By the end of that week, the students knew the truth. Not rumor, not whisper, not myth, truth. And once truth takes root in young hearts, it does not stay quiet. The confrontation came in the very same classroom where the first equation had been solved. The teacher stood at the board, droning through a lecture, but his students weren't listening. They exchanged glances, whispers too sharp to ignore, until finally, Emily raised her hand. "Sir," she said, her voice steady, "is it true that Dr. Carter used to be a professor?" The room froze. The teacher's marker hovered in midair. His back stiffened. Slowly he turned. "Excuse me?" Another voice chimed in. "Marcus, is it true you stole his work?" The words landed like stones thrown through glass. Gasps rippled through the classroom. The teacher's face went pale, then red, then pale again. He opened his mouth, closed it, stumbled. That's ridiculous. He's a janitor. He's nothing." But the words were weak, hollow, stripped of power, because the students had seen enough, read enough, uncovered enough. And behind them, at the back of the classroom, Carter stood in the doorway, silent, watching. He hadn't asked them to fight for him. He hadn't told them the truth, but the truth had found them anyway. And in that moment, the teacher's empire of lies began to crack. The classroom was silent, a silence so heavy it felt alive, pressing against the walls, weighing on every student's chest. At the front, the teacher's face burned with shame and anger, his hands trembling around the marker he still clutched like a weapon. His authority, once unquestioned, now hung by a single thread. At the back, Carter stood. His janitor's uniform clung to him with the faint smell of bleach and dust, but his presence radiated something more powerful than any title or position. The students turned toward him instinctively. They weren't looking at the teacher anymore. They were looking at him. Carter stepped forward slowly, each footstep echoing in the hollow silence. When he reached the front of the classroom, he didn't look at the chalkboard, nor at the students. His eyes locked on the man who had taken everything from him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The weight of years hung between them, betrayal, injustice, silence. Finally, the teacher broke. His voice cracked as he spat the words. "You ruined yourself. You could have stayed quiet, Carter. You could have played the game, but no, you had to challenge me. And look where it got you. A mop, a bucket, and me, standing where you should have been." Carter studied him, his expression unreadable. Then, quietly, he said, "You're right." The teacher blinked, stunned. The students shifted uncomfortably, whispering. "You're right," Carter repeated. "I lost everything. My title, my position, my career. I was stripped of the respect I earned, all because I refused to stay silent. His voice deepened, resonating like a sermon. But what I didn't lose was my integrity, my mind, my ability to teach, and my soul. He turned then, looking at the students. Their eyes were wide, glistening with the weight of the moment. You see, they can take away your title. They can bury your name. They can lock doors in your face. But they cannot take away what is truly yours. Your knowledge, your dignity, your truth. That is yours to carry, no matter where you stand. Whether in a lecture hall or with a mop in your hand, truth remains. The room was electric. The students leaned in, every word searing itself into their hearts. Then Carter did something no one expected. He turned back to the teacher, the man who betrayed him, who had mocked him, who had stolen from him, and extended his hand. I forgive you. The words struck harder than any accusation. The teacher froze, his lips trembling. What? What did you say? I forgive you, Carter repeated calmly. Not for your sake, for mine, because I will not carry the weight of your sin any longer. I will not let what you did to me define the man I am today. The students gasped softly, some covering their mouths. The teacher's body crumpled as if the strength had drained out of him. He dropped the marker, his shoulders sagged. The facade he had built for years, the arrogance, the superiority shattered in front of them all. The days after Carter's quiet act of forgiveness felt different. Not just for the teacher, who walked through the halls with the weight of shame on his shoulders, but for the students who could not stop whispering about the man who had once been invisible. The janitor, the man with the mop, the man who had humbled their teacher with nothing more than chalk and patience. Whispers grew into curiosity. Curiosity grew into courage. And courage, one afternoon, led a small group of students to knock on the door of the supply closet. Carter looked up from his work, a rag in one hand, a bucket at his feet. Something I can help you with? He asked, his voice calm, almost hesitant. Emily stepped forward. She was nervous, twisting the strap of her backpack in her hands. Mr. Carter, can you show us that thing again? The way you explained the derivative? It actually made sense. Carter blinked. He opened his mouth to refuse, because for years he had lived quietly, safely in the shadows. But the eagerness in their eyes stopped him. So, with a slow nod, he said, "Come in." And for the first time, the supply closet became more than a storage room. The students shuffled inside, awkward at first. The air smelled faintly of bleach, and mops leaned like tired soldiers against the wall. But Carter found an old, discarded chalkboard propped against a corner. He wiped the dust off with his sleeve, picked up a stub of chalk, and began to write. The white lines came alive under his hand. Equations flowed, numbers danced, and concepts that once felt impossible suddenly unfolded with clarity. Math, Carter said softly, is not about memorizing steps. It's about seeing patterns and understanding balance. Every equation has its balance, just like life. When something grows heavy on one side, the other side must respond. The students leaned closer, captivated not just by the lesson, but by the man delivering it. Marcus frowned at the chalkboard. So, the hard problems aren't meant to break us? Carter smiled, a weary but warm smile. No, the hard problems are meant to grow you, to teach you patience, discipline, strength. The room fell silent, the kind of silence where truth seeps in and takes root. For the next hour, Carter taught not as a janitor, not as a man broken by injustice, but as what he truly was, a teacher, a mentor, a guide. By the time the students left, their notebooks were filled, their hearts stirred, and word spread quickly. The next day, 5 students showed up. The day after, 10. By the end of the week, the supply closet was overflowing, students sitting on the floor, leaning against shelves, some even standing in the hallway just to hear Carter's voice. It was more than tutoring. It was more than math. It was a movement. The hidden classroom had been born. And while the teacher at the front of the official classroom grew colder, harsher, more desperate to keep control, the students' respect, their loyalty, their admiration was slowly shifting toward the man with the mop, the man who was never supposed to be more than invisible. The classroom once belonged to him. Every creak of the floorboards, every scratch of chalk, every hesitant hand raised it all fed his pride. But now, the room felt different. When the teacher walked in, the air was heavy. Students sat upright, but their eyes no longer clung to him. Their notebooks were open, pens in hand. But the spark, the curiosity that once validated him, was gone. He could feel it. He could see it. They weren't with him anymore. When he asked a question, the silence that followed was not respect. It was disinterest. When he explained a formula, their eyes didn't light up. Instead, some of them exchanged glances as though comparing his words to someone else's voice. And when he cracked a joke, the kind he had told 100 times before to polite chuckles, the room remained dead still. The laughter was gone. The attention was gone. The authority he had clung to was slipping through his fingers like sand. It began in small humiliations. One morning, he spotted Emily whispering to Marcus in the back. He snapped at them. Care to share with the class? Expecting their usual embarrassment. But Emily only lifted her notebook, covered in clean, precise equations. We were just checking Carter's method, she said simply. The name hung in the air like a knife. Carter. The students nodded in agreement. They weren't ashamed. They weren't afraid. They were bold. The teacher's throat went dry. He turned back to the board, forcing himself to continue, but the word echoed in his mind. Carter. 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 Soon after, he noticed the change in their grades. Students who had struggled for months were suddenly passing tests with ease. Assignments were turned in on time. Mistakes once repeated over and over were gone, corrected by a hand that wasn't his. He should have been proud. A teacher should have celebrated improvement. But he wasn't proud. He was furious, because the victories weren't his. They were Carter's. And with every rising grade, every glowing smile, every whisper of gratitude, the teacher's shadow grew smaller. He tried harder. His lessons became stricter, his tone sharper, his punishments harsher. But the more he tried to control them, the more they drifted. The more he shouted, the quieter they became. The more he demanded respect, the more they gave their respect to someone else. By the end of each day, he sat at his desk long after the students had gone, staring at the empty chairs. His hand trembled as he gripped his pen, his papers untouched. And the thought he had fought to bury clawed its way to the surface. They don't need me anymore. They've found someone better. Outside, down the hall, laughter echoed. Not the cruel laughter that once mocked Carter, but genuine laughter, warm and alive. The sound drifted into the classroom, taunting him, reminding him of the truth he couldn't escape. The students weren't gathering around him anymore. They were gathering around the janitor. And for the first time, the teacher who once stood so tall, so untouchable, felt small, so very, very small. It started as a simple idea. A project for class. A grade in the book. The assignment was straightforward. Create a media piece that tells a story worth sharing. Most groups chose safe topics. The basketball team's championship. The new cafeteria renovations. The debate club's latest tournament. But Emily sat in the back row, her eyes drifting not to the board, not to her notebook, but to the man she had just seen push a mop across the hallway. Carter. Her pencil tapped against the desk as an idea took root. A dangerous idea. A necessary idea. At lunch, she gathered Marcus, Aisha, and a handful of others around the corner table in the cafeteria. What if, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder, we do it on Carter? The table went still. You mean the janitor? Marcus asked cautiously. No, Emily said firmly. Not the janitor. The teacher. The man who explains things better than anyone in this school. The man who solved what he wasn't supposed to. The man who, she lowered her voice, was silenced. A murmur rippled across the table. Aisha leaned in, her eyes narrowing with curiosity. My cousin's in college, she said. She said Dr. Carter was a big deal once. A professor. A genius. But then his name just disappeared. The students exchanged looks. Pieces of a puzzle scattered across whispers, stories, half-truths. And suddenly, they wanted the picture complete. That afternoon, they approached Carter. He was cleaning windows, his reflection fractured in the glass. Mr. Carter, Emily said gently, we want to make you the subject of our media project. Carter froze. His rag stilled against the glass. Slowly, he turned, eyes weary. Me? Yes, Marcus said, almost defiantly. You have a story that deserves to be told, and we want to tell it. Carter's expression hardened, not angry, pained. No, he said quietly. No, children. Leave the past where it is. Some stories don't need to be told. But they didn't listen, because the more he tried to bury his story, the more they felt it had to rise. They began filming in secret, phones hidden in backpacks, recorders tucked under sleeves, clips of Carter teaching in the supply closet, his chalk squeaking on the old board, his words echoing like scripture. Every hard problem is an opportunity to grow. They captured his hands, rough from years of labor, gliding effortlessly across equations that their teachers still stumbled to explain. They interviewed students who had failed exams but now spoke with confidence, their notebooks filled with Carter's neat diagrams. Piece by piece, a picture began to form. And in their editing, in their late-night sessions huddled over laptops, the students realized something chilling. This wasn't just a project. It was a resurrection. They weren't just making a film. They were giving Carter his voice back. When the teacher heard whispers of the project, his blood ran cold. In the middle of class, Emily raised her hand, her voice bold and clear. For our assignment, we're making a documentary on Mr. Carter. The room buzzed with excitement. Students nodded. Some even clapped softly. The teacher froze, his marker halfway through an equation. His jaw tightened. That, he said sharply, will not be acceptable. Why not? Marcus asked from the back. His tone wasn't rebellious, it was challenging. The teacher's lips curled. Because he's not relevant. Emily's voice cut through the air like a blade. He's more relevant than you think. The room erupted. Murmurs, agreement, heads nodding, voices rising. And for the first time, the teacher realized he wasn't just losing control of his class. He was losing control of the story. Outside, Carter mopped the hallway, unaware that in secret, his name was being pieced back together. And soon, the world would remember. The project spread like fire through dry grass, whispers in hallways, laptops glowing after dark, clips traded from phone to phone, edited with shaky hands but burning conviction. And though Carter tried to live as though nothing had changed, he felt it. Eyes linger longer on him. Students smiled at him with a kind of reverence that was new and dangerous. One afternoon, as he wheeled his cart down the quiet corridor, Emily and Marcus intercepted him. Their faces shone with excitement, their phones clutched like treasures. Mr. Carter, Emily said, almost breathless, you have to see this. Before he could protest, Marcus pressed play. The screen lit up with his own image, Carter at the chalkboard in the supply closet, his voice explaining the balance of equations. He looked older, wearier than he remembered himself. But his words, they rang with clarity, power, authority. Carter's hand shot out, trembling. He snatched the phone from Marcus, thumb slamming against the pause button. Where did you get this? His voice was sharp, his chest heaving. Marcus blinked. We filmed it, for the project. Don't you see, sir? People need to hear you. No! The word echoed down the empty hallway. The students froze. Carter rarely raised his voice. His hands shook as he handed the phone back. His eyes glistened not with pride, but with something heavier, something darker. You don't understand, he whispered, his voice breaking. My story is not a triumph. It's a warning. Emily frowned. But it is triumph. Look at what you've done for us. Look at how you've changed this school. Carter shook his head, stepping back, as though distance could protect them. You see a teacher, you see wisdom, but the world, he closed his eyes. The world sees a man they broke, a man who spoke out when he should have stayed quiet, a man who lost everything. His chest rose and fell, heavy with years of silence pressing against his ribs. I buried that story because it nearly buried me. Don't you dare dig it back up. The students stared at him, torn between fear and sorrow. But sir, Emily said softly, tears welling in her eyes, don't you see? They already buried you. They made you invisible. And now we're trying to bring you back. For a moment, Carter's face cracked. The armor he wore, forged from decades of humiliation and survival, split open just enough to reveal the man inside, weary, broken, longing. But then, as quickly as it came, the crack sealed. His voice hardened. "No, you'll stop this. Right now. Promise me." The weight of his demand pressed on their shoulders. Slowly, reluctantly, Marcus nodded. Emily did not. Because while Carter demanded silence, Emily's heart burned with defiance. And deep inside, she knew. Some stories weren't meant to stay buried. That night, Carter sat alone in the supply closet. The chalkboard still bore the faint marks of his last lesson. He traced the lines with his finger, whispering to himself, "They don't need my pain. They need my peace." But outside, beyond the door, the students were already editing, already shaping his voice into something larger than himself. The warning had been given, but the rebellion had already begun. The teacher sat at his desk long after the last bell had rung. The room empty, except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. The papers in front of him were untouched. His red pen lay still. His mind wasn't on the work. It hadn't been for weeks. He knew the whispers weren't just rumors anymore. He knew the shift in loyalty wasn't his imagination. The name Carter hung in the air wherever he went, haunting him like a ghost he couldn't banish. But ghosts didn't steal students. Ghosts didn't steal respect. This wasn't a haunting. It was a takeover. And then, the proof arrived. He was walking through the library, a place he rarely visited, when he caught sight of a glow from behind one of the computer screens. A group of students huddled together, headphones plugged in, their eyes wide and glued to the screen. Curiosity tugged at him, suspicion sharpening his step. He moved closer, silent as a predator. And there it was. On the screen, playing in crisp clarity, was Carter. His voice calm, measured, resonant. His chalk tracing a line across the battered board. His words weaving math with wisdom, teaching not only equations, but life itself. The teacher's stomach dropped. His throat went dry. The screen cut to an interview clip. Emily's voice filled with conviction. "Mr. Carter isn't just our janitor. He's the reason I understand math. He's the reason I want to keep learning. He's the best teacher I've ever had." The other students nodded, their voices overlapping with praise, gratitude, admiration. For Carter, always for Carter. The teacher's face burned red. His jaw clenched so hard it hurt. They weren't supposed to know. They weren't supposed to see. Carter was supposed to stay hidden, scrubbing floors, emptying trash, invisible. But now, the story was breaking free. And if it reached the wrong ears, everything the teacher had built, his career, his reputation, his fragile sense of authority, would shatter. He stormed back to his classroom, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. His hands shook as he gripped the edge of his desk, breathing hard. He knew what he had to do. This project couldn't survive. Not the files, not the footage, not the whispers. Nothing. He would find a way to erase it, to silence it, to silence Carter. That evening, long after most had gone home, the teacher prowled the hallways. He peeked into the supply closet, dark, empty. But the chalkboard still bore Carter's neat equations. The sight made his stomach twist with rage. He pressed on, stopping outside the media lab. Through the glass window, he saw the glow of computer screens, hard drives stacked on the desk, cameras piled in a corner. This is it, he thought. This is where they're building their rebellion. His hand rested on the doorknob, a dangerous thought rising inside him. If he could get in, if he could wipe those files, smash those drives, the story would die before it was ever born. But then he hesitated, because deep down, a darker realization clawed at his mind. It wasn't just the project he wanted to destroy. It was Carter himself. The teacher turned away from the door, his steps echoing through the empty halls. His heart pounded with a sick mix of fear and fury. For the first time in his career, he wasn't thinking about teaching. He wasn't thinking about grades, or tests, or lessons. He was thinking about survival. And in his mind, only one conclusion remained. If Carter's story lived, his own would die. The whispers reached Carter before the confrontation ever did. A custodian passing in the hallway muttered it. A student, pale-faced, stammered it. And then finally, Emily herself, breathless, confirmed it. He knows, Mr. Carter. He knows about the project. Carter's rag froze against the window pane. For a long moment, he didn't move. His reflection stared back at him, tired eyes, lined with the weight of too many battles, too many losses. He had prayed this wouldn't happen, that the students' fire would burn bright, but quietly, safely. But now, the flames had caught the wrong eyes. He turned slowly, his voice calm but firm. Emily, listen to me. You need to stop. All of you. Emily shook her head, defiance flashing in her eyes. No, we're too far in. People are starting to pay attention. The other classes want to see it. This isn't just about math anymore, sir. This is about truth. Carter's voice grew sharper, though it trembled beneath the weight of fear. Truth is dangerous, especially when it threatens the comfortable lies men build their power on. Do you understand? He will not just stand by and let this happen. Marcus, who had been silent, stepped forward. So what? We can't let fear keep us quiet. Isn't that what they did to you? Isn't that why you're here now? The words cut deep. Because they were true. Carter closed his eyes. He remembered the last time he had stood tall, spoken out, believed that justice would shield him. And he remembered how quickly the world had turned its back. You don't know what he's capable of, Carter whispered. You don't know what men will do when they feel their power slipping. He will not come after me. He will come after you. The room fell silent. The students shifted uneasily, the weight of his warning pressing down like a storm cloud. That night, Carter sat in the supply closet alone. The chalkboard glowed faintly under the flickering bulb above. He traced an equation on the board, his voice barely above a whisper. Balance, he murmured. Every action has its counter. Every weight finds its opposite. He dropped the chalk, his hand trembling. God, don't let them pay the price for my mistakes. The next morning, Carter acted differently. He walked the halls with sharper eyes, watching the teachers' movements. He lingered near classrooms where students whispered about the project. He positioned himself between hostility and innocence, between the man unraveling and the children who didn't yet understand the danger. It became, quietly, a shield. But shields can only hold so long against a force determined to break through. And Carter knew the collision was coming. The day began like any other. The bell rang. Desks filled. The air carried the usual scent of pencil shavings and floor wax. But beneath it all, there was tension, an invisible hum, like static before a storm. The students felt it. Carter felt it. And most of all, the teacher felt it. He entered the classroom with papers under his arm, his face tight, his steps stiff. There was no greeting, no lighthearted warm-up question, only silence as he scrawled formulas across the board with unnecessary force. The chalk broke twice. Each time, his hand trembled as he reached for another piece. When he finally turned, his eyes scanned the room. They weren't looking at him. They weren't listening. Their notebooks bore not his methods, but Carter's. Their whispers carried not his name, but Carter's. And then he saw it. Emily, bold as ever, had her phone propped discreetly against her book, recording notes. He caught a glimpse of the screen before she lowered it. An unfinished video timeline, Carter's face frozen mid-sentence. It was enough. Give me that. The words cracked through the room like a whip. His hand shot out, pointing at Emily. She froze. The class went silent. Sir? She asked cautiously. The phone. Now. His voice was sharp, jagged, carrying more than authority, carrying rage. The students exchanged nervous glances. Emily's hands trembled as she held the phone closer to her chest. It's for our project, she whispered. You can't just, I said, give it to me. The shout rattled the windows. A few students flinched. One or two muttered under their breath. Marcus stood suddenly, his voice rising. She doesn't have to. It's her work. It's our work. The teacher's face flushed crimson. His voice shook with fury and desperation. Do you think this is a game? Do you think you can destroy my classroom with your little hero worship? He is nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing. The word echoed. The insult cut. And in that silence, the students' eyes turned toward the doorway. Because Carter was standing there. He hadn't meant to intrude. He was only passing by, his cart rattling softly. But when the shouting reached him, he couldn't walk past. Not this time. His gaze swept the room. Emily's tearful eyes, Marcus's clenched fists, the teacher's trembling hand, and slowly, Carter stepped forward. "Enough," he said softly. The teacher stiffened. "This is my classroom. You don't belong here." Carter's voice was calm, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. "Then why do they keep finding me?" The words landed like a hammer. Students shifted, some nodding, some even murmuring in agreement. The teacher's hands curled into fists. His voice cracked. "Because you're poisoning them, filling their heads with lies. They don't need you, they have me." Carter's eyes softened, not with anger, but with something more dangerous: pity. "They don't belong to either of us. They belong to themselves. And if they see truth in what I share, then maybe you should ask why they don't see it in you." The class buzzed, a low hum of astonishment. The balance of power had shifted, right there, in the middle of the lesson. The teacher's lips trembled. His authority, once unquestioned, lay in ruins on the floor. And Carter, the man who was never supposed to stand tall again, had spoken the words that could never be unsaid. The storm had broken, but storms don't just pass. They leave destruction in their wake. And everyone in that room knew the fallout was coming. Word traveled fast, faster than whispers, faster than gossip. By the end of the day, the story of what happened in room 204 had spread through every hallway, spilled across every lunch table, and buzzed in every group chat. They spoke of the shouting. They spoke of Emily refusing to hand over her phone. They spoke of Marcus standing tall, unafraid. But mostly, they spoke of Carter, the janitor who walked in at the exact moment the teacher's voice cracked. The janitor who spoke not with anger, not with venom, but with truth so sharp it cut the room in two. Some students called it the bravest moment they had ever seen. Others whispered that it was dangerous, that he had signed his own punishment. But no one forgot it. By the next morning, it was no longer just the students talking. The principal called Carter into his office. The blinds were drawn tight, the room heavy with silence. "Mr. Carter," the principal began, his voice low, "do you realize what's happening?" Carter stood tall, but his eyes were weary. "I realize the truth is leaking through cracks you can't patch anymore." The principal sighed, removing his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Parents are calling, teachers are murmuring. The board will hear of this soon. A janitor standing in a classroom, undermining one of my staff. Do you understand how that looks?" Carter's lips curved into a sad smile. "I understand how it feels. It feels like freedom. For them. For the kids who finally see that knowledge isn't locked behind a title or a paycheck." The principal slammed his palm on the desk. "This isn't about kids, Carter. This is about order. And right now, you're breaking it." Meanwhile, the teacher, his pride shredded, his control slipping, was not silent either. In the faculty lounge, he leaned close to colleagues, whispering poison. "He's overstepping, filling their heads with fantasies. He's dangerous. Don't be fooled by his act." But the more he spoke, the more his desperation showed. His words, meant to cut Carter down, only exposed his own unraveling. And some teachers, those who had watched their own students struggle and suddenly thrive, began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, Carter was not the villain at all. The students, however, refused to waver. Emily stood in the cafeteria on Friday, phone in hand, voice trembling but strong. "We have the footage. We're finishing the documentary. And if they try to shut us down, we'll put it online ourselves." Here erupted. For the first time, Carter's name wasn't whispered. It was shouted, echoing off the walls, rising like an anthem. But Carter didn't cheer. That night, alone in the supply closet, he sat hunched on a stool, staring at the chalkboard. His hand traced the faint outline of an equation, but his mind wasn't on math. He remembered the last time his voice had grown too loud. He remembered how quickly institutions crushed inconvenient men, and as the sound of distant laughter and footsteps faded from the hallways, Carter whispered into the darkness, "God, don't let them destroy these children for following me. Don't let them pay the price I already paid." Because he knew something the students didn't. When a man rises from invisibility, the world does not clap. It claws. And the claws were already reaching. The summons came in a plain envelope, folded, stamped, and slipped into Carter's cart like a notice of debt. He knew what it was before he opened it. He had seen envelopes like it before decades ago when another institution had stripped him of his title, his career, his dignity. Mr. Carter, you are requested to appear before the school board to discuss recent disruptions. The words were polite. The meaning was not. This was not a discussion. This was a trial. The night before, Carter sat in the supply closet. The air was still. His hands rested on the chalkboard ledge, white dust clinging to his fingers. He whispered to himself, as if rehearsing, "You tell the truth. You tell it clean. You let them decide." But another voice, buried deep inside, whispered back, "They don't want the truth. They want silence. And silence has always been your sentence." The boardroom was sterile. Long table, polished wood, 7 faces staring down at him from behind nameplates. The principal sat stiffly at one end, the teacher at the other, his tie too tight, his face smug and pale. And in the middle, Carter sat with his hands folded, a man who had mopped these very floors yet was now forced to defend his existence inside their walls. The chairwoman cleared her throat. "Mr. Carter, it has been brought to our attention that you've been teaching students without authorization, that you've disrupted the normal order of instruction, that you've undermined staff." Her words were careful, measured, each one dipped in formality, but sharpened with accusation. Carter looked up, his eyes calm but tired. "I wasn't teaching. I was answering questions, filling gaps. They came to me." The teacher leaned forward, venom lacing his voice. "They came to him because he poached them, because he glamorized himself, turned himself into some kind of underground hero. He's not a teacher. He's a janitor. He has no credentials, no right to stand in front of those kids." The words struck like stones, meant to bruise. But Carter did not flinch. Then, from the back of the room, a sound broke the tension. A chair scraping, footsteps. Emily stepped forward, followed by Marcus, Aisha, and a dozen others. One by one, they entered the boardroom, their notebooks in hand, their faces set with quiet fire. "Excuse me," Emily said, her voice trembling but strong. "We're the reason he's here. And if you're going to put him on trial, then put us on trial too." The board members shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't in the script. Marcus lifted his math binder, filled with Carter's careful diagrams. "I was failing before Mr. Carter helped me. Now I'm passing. He didn't poach me. I went to him because he explained what my own teacher couldn't," Aisha added. "He never asked us to film him. We chose to, because we believe the world should know the truth about the man you're trying to erase." The teacher slammed his palm on the table. "Enough of this circus. You're children. You don't understand the damage he's doing. If you reward this, if you let him continue, you undermine everything we stand for." Carter finally spoke, his voice quiet but commanding. "Maybe it's not me undermining you. Maybe it's the truth. Maybe they see something in me that you've forgotten how to give them." The words hung heavy in the room. The board members looked at one another, unease written in their eyes. For the first time, it wasn't Carter who looked small. It was the teacher,